that label put on us. So a lot of times we just ignore it. We're like, if we don't look, it's not there. And it's a huge problem in the white population. Huge problem. We need to address it. And so I'm super thankful that you invited us to do this, Marnese, because this is a starting point.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on. So, all right, Jennifer, Lorah, Andrew, Coleman.
Sure, I'll go next. I think that racist policies for so long have kept us separate, which also allowed us to pretend that racism didn't happen. Things like redlining, where we put Black folks in certain communities and white folks in other communities, let us sort of live ignorantly to the struggles that the other side has and to the struggles that the Black community had. They had their schools, we had our schools. And sort of with all of these separations, it sort of lets us live a life where our lives don't have to touch and we don't have to know what's going on with the other folks around us. And until I would say that one of the biggest factors that launched awareness was cell phone videos, and being able to see that actually there might actually be a systemic problem with the way policing works, and there might be a systemic problem with equality in schools, and there might be a systemic problem in just straight representation for other communities. And I think that actually seeing it and actually being able to put yourself in other people's shoes and watch people's situation has accelerated the awareness of the differences in the two communities.
Thank you so much, Coleman, for that.
Thanks, Marnese, for having us and for facilitating this. My name is Lorah, for those who don't know me. And there's like a lot of different things that come to mind for me. One thing is similar to what others have said, which is that a lot of white people have spent a lot of their lives very coddled and able to sort of avoid a lot of the horrors of racism, and have been in positions where they're, beneficiaries of racist systems. And so I think white people have a lot of discomfort a lot of times having conversations about race, because some people feel shame, some people feel uncomfortable, they don't have a language, they don't have a framework. White people are just uncomfortable talking about race and uncomfortable with, like Bruce said, confrontation and sort of grappling with and walking through the really ugly, violent, gross realities of race in the United States and racism around the globe. So I think that's part of it. I think another part of it that's important to keep in mind, that a reason a lot of white people have challenges talking about race, is that a lot of white people have gone through the public school system or even the private school system in the United States that has completely colonized racist education around history of the United States and the United States' position in the world. And so people also just don't have a good baseline, don't have a good understanding and history of the dynamics and the histories and the systems that have been built to perpetuate racism in the United States. So I think that's another important factor.
All right. Jennifer or Mead, would you like to add to this, or Andrew? Andrew, you look like you're ready to get in there.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I have too much to add on what other people have said, but, I think there are multiple reasons that it's a very challenging conversation. So number one, for a lot of white people, especially those that are learning about those histories that are not necessarily taught in school, it's a process, and a lot of people are afraid of causing harm, specifically by saying, things that may not be correct or maybe interpreted in a certain way that they didn't intend, out of ignorance. And I think, as alluded to in the beginning, there's also a fear of confrontation. There's a lot of emotions, in my opinion, tied up in this whole idea of systemic racism. And I think white people are very good at, there's this picture of a racist act, right, being committed out in public. And a lot of people, that's where their conception of racism stops. is if someone is not directly confronting somebody else, then it's not the systemic stuff, the more pernicious stuff is not considered part of that. And so when you reframe the conversation and start to talk about, how the whole system is built in such a way that it has perpetuated systems of white supremacy and racism for so long, that's when it starts to call into question some very fundamental assumptions about who we are as a society, right? And that's very scary, I think, for people. When people have conversations like that, actually, the same centers, when they're confronting a threat, go off in their brain. And I think it brings up a lot of emotions. And so I think that's one of the reasons it's really difficult. But I think it's also important to confront that discomfort if people are going to grow. So it's important to lean in to that discomfort. But it is inherently just going to be challenging, I feel, because of those aspects.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit more about white fragility as we get more into the conversation. But I'd like to bring Mead and Jennifer in if you had any thoughts about this, because I had another question, a follow-up question about this.
You want to go ahead, Jennifer?
No, go ahead.
Okay, I was gonna. I think agree and maybe extend a little bit on what people are saying. I think the guilt and shame associated with whiteness causes a lot of people to sort of bury their head in the sand, because if you do that, then you don't really have to face the difficult feelings associated with being part of an oppressive group. So if we see an unarmed Black man get killed, we're by the color of our skin, we're aligned with the police officer in a sense, and to have to grapple with the fact that I likely wouldn't have been shot or choked or killed. I think there's a lot of uncomfortable feelings with having to see that the system's so unfair, and yet you personally are benefiting from it in a way. So I think to try to zone out of that, there's kind of a luxury in not talking about it, not thinking about it. And then the other thing I think that can be challenging for a lot of white people is to consider themselves as a part of the issue, not just because I think if you say the system is the issue, it sort of is a way of sort of distancing yourself from it. But to really be able to consider yourself as a part of the issue and to reflect on how am I participating in this, again, I think it evokes even more guilt, shame, anxiety. So we try to stay away from it.
I get that. And we kind of, when I'm doing trainings and explaining to different Black, Indigenous, Brown people of color that we perpetuate white supremacy culture, and it shows up in different ways that we may not be aware of because we're trying to survive, right? And so, yeah, it does come with shame, but then also we're trying to survive the systematic oppression that white people put on us. So it's like, to move forward, at what point do we stop making excuses, right? And that we are part of this system and we need to all be a part of dismantling. Otherwise, we're complicit in the oppression of other people. So Jennifer, did you have anything to add before I move on to the next question?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, why racism is hard to talk about is because I don't feel that I know anything. I mean, I feel like my role in conversations about race is to be an active listener and learn what I don't know I don't even know. I mean, the more that I learn, the more that I learn, there's no way I could fathom the Black experience without the generosity of my Black friends being vulnerable and sharing that with me. And just the privilege that I've had to be in circles where it opens up space for authentic dialogue. Without that, I would just have no clue of what the Black experience is. So I really feel most of my job is shut up and listen. That's why it's hard to have conversations. In terms of speaking with people when racism comes up, people don't talk to me with openly racist dialogue. How it shows up is they're anti-Detroit. Last week I went to visit my dad at the senior community center where he lives, and they all want to know about my business and what do I do for a living. So I have to talk to the folk before I go in to see my dad, and so they know I work in Detroit, and they say, well, just don't stop while you're there. Like, I'm there. But I mean, what's behind that is it's not safe, and behind that is it's not safe because of Black people. So it's, and what are you gonna do? Old people just they let it rip. So that's just they're letting it out. But how do you how do you pick and choose when to have that conversation with folk? So yeah, I'm definitely interested in exploring that.
Thank you. So I have a question. Do you guys think all white people are racist?
It's hard to.
Yeah.
Like, would you say, oh my gosh, I'm racist?
I could say I'm racist, but I don't want to just snap to judgment for somebody else. I must say, in all my years, I've never met anybody, any white person, where I've come away thinking that person is not a racist. But I certainly don't presume to look into everyone's heart and then make that declaration. But I will say that, yeah, I am.
To be more explicit, I mean, of course, there's the difference between the overt and the covert racist, and how, you have the extreme racists over here with Donald Trump, but then you have the progressive racists who are calling the police on Black people for just walking in a park or something like that, or just simply having a barbecue. Like, do you feel like you have been caught in that position where you had to question yourself, well, am I a racist because I did that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say that I don't think you can grow up in this country and not be a racist, especially if you can use the broad definition in terms of including covert, as well as explicit. So definitely, and I think, as was mentioned earlier, someone else was mentioning it. The more you learn about it, I think the more you discover how racist you really are, which is, I think, in fact, more empowering to be able to consider your own sort of racist thoughts or actions, as opposed to the stance of I'm not a racist, I don't see color. So I think we none of us can really escape it. We can just become more and more familiar with it, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting, there's one of the problems I feel in terms of communication, like I mentioned earlier, is that white folks, especially in growing up, have a different idea of what racism is. So when they're being told they're racist, or they're seeing someone say I'm racist in some way, it shocks them because they're not up on the, sort of the way that the theories and the academics work together. Because I mean, there's a lot of sort of caveats, right? Like there's this power plus privilege distinction, where I think that's not something that everybody understands. And then there's, just the fact that we live in neighborhoods that are redlined, right? And that accumulated a bunch of wealth over time. And so by having the advantage of inheriting, wealth from those neighborhoods, we are complicit in that racist system. And I think when a lot of people say that they're racist, those are also some of the things they're talking about, not just necessarily the overt stuff, but I think it's kind of a trigger, unfortunately, because people aren't talking on the same language. And so I think white people need to have more education on sort of, what's going on with those terminologies, and understand like kind of where that discussion is going. But I think ultimately, yes, that the whole system was built on that premise, and therefore, to some degree, we're all complicit in racism.
Thank you. Coleman, you look like you said, yeah. I was like, wow, okay.
Yes, I mean, I agree with Mead, is that, it's the water we swim in a lot of ways. It's the environment that we grew up in. It's the movies that we watched that told us at a young age that Black people commit crime and more violent crime. It's the fact that, a lot of our country was built by slave labor that was based on race. that racism is the water that we swim in. Now, there are plenty of people who have done some really great work and interpersonal work on themselves to overcome those things and to move on and to acknowledge those things. But I think that we see in things like implicit bias tests and things like that, that we've all got that inside of us. And it's it's on each one of us to grow and to be better and to do the work that's required to move on and sort of not live our lives where that governs a lot of our actions, decisions, and movements.
All right. So we all see that there's a lot of anti-Blackness going around, right? So have you inherently, like, in your experience, did some anti-Black perpetuated anti-Blackness? And what did you do to educate yourself to move from that space or that thought process?
I think for me, mine started growing up seeing in the media the stereotypes of Black people being more violent and criminal, as said previously. And I would like go into the parts of town that people would say are not good parts of town. And I'd be like hyper aware there, but driving through a different part of the city, I'd be fine, or I'd feel fine. And I'd sit, after a while, I'd sit there and be like, why am I doing this? Like, I've never met these people. They've done nothing to hurt me. They've done nothing to hurt anyone that I know or anyone that in general, for all I don't know these people. They don't know me. Why am I judging them and assuming things about them? So I had to try to fix like my irrational fear, I guess, of going to quote certain parts of town or seeing people the way, how do I say this? Based on the comparisons I'd see on TV, seeing people who look similar, like in face to face, I had to fix myself to be like, you have no right to judge them. You don't know them. They're just going about their day. So I had to really try to fix that. And sometimes, I'm going to be honest, sometimes I still do struggle, and it's something I'm actively continually working on. And it's not something I'm proud of by any means. Like,
so why is that hard for some white people to admit? Is it because the whole extreme racism piece of, saying that, oh my gosh, I'm a racist, that means I'm like a KKK member? Why is that hard to just acknowledge? Like, we already know that it's in the DNA of white people, right? But why can't you some people, because you just acknowledge it, just say that?
I think, like you just said, and like I said earlier, we don't want that label of being racist.
Mm-hmm.
And when we hear the word racist, we think of KKK. We think of people like actively going out of their way to be aggressive, mm-hmm. and physical altercations and those things. But what we forget or try to ignore are the microaggressions, right, that go along with racism.
Right.
So it's, people hear racist and they think it's a harsh word. They think it's a, no pun intended, black and white issue,
right, when
it's like a very large spectrum,
right,
of different actions, different microaggressions, different thought processes, different phrases and different words, different things we say, ideologies, etc. So you really have to do a lot of self-reflection, and that makes people really uncomfortable because they don't want to be a bad person. At least, I don't think most people want to be a bad person. So it's,
right.
And it's work.
Tough.
Sometimes it's hard work. That self-reflection, that checking in. How easy is it to just roll along through life and let the thoughts come in and just let them go, instead of looking through that environmental justice lens that Katie's talking about and checking myself throughout the day. I should be looking at this differently. Let me look at this differently. It's hard work.
All right. Anybody have any thoughts of anti-Blackness and how it may have been perpetuated, and what did you do? Because there are a lot of people out here, a lot of white people trying to figure out how to help during this, time, right? There's a lot of racial tension going on in the world. And to me, I'm like, there's resources for you, right? I need to take care of myself. I have a brother, I have a dad, I have a son, I have a daughter, right? They're killing Black women, right? So I need to think about that besides educating white people. So what are your thoughts on that? Lorah, I think you were about to say something.
Yeah. I agree with a lot of the points that have been made by other people, and just this point that for a lot of people, for a lot of white people, like it's a continuous and maybe lifelong journey of unlearning anti-Blackness and challenging anti-Blackness as you recognize it in yourself. And I think even for like people, like maybe some people that are on this call who might, consider themselves woke, definitely not consider themselves to be overtly racist. There's like all sorts of even smaller ways that like anti-Blackness shows up, from like the types of media that we seek out, the types of media and culture that we like privilege as being good or do or don't take seriously. I mean, there's all these like really pervasive ways that anti-Blackness shows up, and it's not always in these really violent or overt ways that people are thinking of, but this is all sort of like perpetuating and compounding and building a culture of white supremacy and anti-Blackness. So I think that's important to keep in mind.
So I have a statement from the chat, and I'm not going to say their name, but they're saying, quotes, all white people are racist cannot be true, even if it is a majority. All of anything takes away from truth. Do you have any thoughts on that?
What was that? You said all of what?
All of anything takes away from truth.
Oh, right. Yeah. I mean, I think it's to what Bruce was saying. You can't really say all. I mean, I'm saying all, but I can see that would be, you could definitely disagree, because it's a problem. I think anytime you say all. I would stand by my statement, but I can see that someone might have an objection to it.
Yeah, I don't think that all white people are racist. I honestly think that all people are conditioned by societal norms in conscious and unconscious ways that we'll probably never know the extent of. So the only goal is just to become conscious. And I know that I'm unconscious most of the time about most things. So the only thing I am out to do is just become more conscious. But it's not unique to white people. The Aztecs kicked the Mayans' ass, and you would have looked at them and thought those are the same people. So, I mean, these is something that's been going on throughout history. White people happen to have done this in a really horrific way in this country for decades. But that doesn't mean it's inherent. You can just look at children play. It's something that is learned.
Okay. All right. Look. Lorah, were you going to say something?
I can do Zoom. I appreciate what Jennifer is saying about just the responsibility that white people need to take for, gaining a critical consciousness and, educating themselves on systems of white supremacy. I do want to challenge us to think beyond a goal of gaining a consciousness. I think, sort of what you're getting at with this question of, are all white people racist? Like, it's impossible for white people to, escape the legacy of white supremacy. White people have a responsibility to this legacy, to account for this legacy and for these conditions. But if a white person wants to be anti-racist, you have to do more than just be aware of racism and racist systems. I mean, it requires action that's working to, actively undo racism and confront racism. And gaining a critical consciousness is like a very important step, but I think it's problematic for white people to stop there.
Yeah, and I wanted to get your all thoughts on showing up for Black, Brown, Indigenous, and other communities of color. Let's talk about white actor, white ally, white accomplice. What are your thoughts on that? Because I see a lot of woke white people showing up at Black Lives Matter rallies, seeing in emails, staying there in solidarity with defunding the police. Like, there's a spectrum, right? And so we have actors who say they're down for the cause, and then we have the allies who actually kind of show up. But then when it comes to accomplice and putting your life on the line, like we had white clergy back during the civil rights movement who actually have died, white people who actually died for Black people during that time. How do you move? And I'm not asking, well, look, how do we move people along this spectrum, actor, ally, and accomplice, right? Because after a while, there's going to have to be a conversation of how you all show up if we're going to continue to live in this society together. Otherwise, we're going to be kind of repeating the same behaviors as we can see back in the civil rights movement and all these other movements. Because I get it, I have people ask me all the time, like, Marnese, what can we do? What can we do? And I'm like, okay, let me yield you to white people who are in the field, right? Because we're all in the field. You all are all in the field in some type of capacity doing social justice type of work or part of an organization that that works with Black and brown people. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
I'll give that a shot. I can give it a shot second, but I'll give it a shot first. For me, it started with relationships, Marnese. It started with first putting myself into places where I was the minority, and then developing friendships. So friendships with African Americans that I didn't have before, spending time with them, traveling with them, listening to. They'd share with me what they went through, what they still go through growing up. When we stop at a gas station and I make a quip to the cashier about how we're making the drug run to Mexico, I mean, they gasp, and in the car they say, Bruce, we can't joke about that kind of stuff. You can, but we're afraid to. But it's through these relationships then where becoming an ally or an accomplice got very easy. Because what was happening and what still does happen to my friends in terms of traffic stops or a fear of capital executions and history of lynchings, those stories, it became natural to now share these as a starting point with my white friends. If they want to talk about something environmental, I'm naturally inclined to say, hey, before we go there, can I share with you what some of my African American friends face every day? What it's like for them to get in behind the wheel of a car that you and I don't have to deal with at all. So relationships, that's the starting point for me.
Thank you, Bruce. I like to bring, especially the males, because you see a lot of white females in these dominant spaces. So I like to, empower the males, Coleman, Andrew, and me to kind of speak up about this, because I see the white women showing up.
All right. Well, I can say a little bit about it. I think that's probably my cue here. I mean, I will say that it's a lot about relationships, but I think it's also about education at the end of the day. And people in this country, particularly white people, are not necessarily aware of the histories and the systems that are at work here. I know we didn't really get to talk a lot about the conception of whiteness, and I don't know if we'll get to that or not, but a lot of scholars talk about Bacon's Rebellion actually being one of the seminal moments where we had indentured servants and enslaved Africans rising up together because they had interests as workers or people that were being exploited by wealthy landowners. And the system of whiteness was partially created legally to control and keep stability for the wealthier interests. And so I think, a lot of our history has either through cultural blindness or through intentional maliciousness been removed. A lot of people don't know about Black Wall Street that are white. They don't know about, when they drive over the expressway here in Detroit, that it used to be Hastings Street, a really thriving Black neighborhood. And they don't understand how those things are related to their own struggles as working class people. And so I think there's an importance of education that people need to understand as well. And what the hard work that we really have to do is to get out in the community and have those discussions about how race has been politically used for centuries to divide people for economic control of the entire system, right? And so I think that's a big part of the conversation we need to address a little more.
Yeah, you definitely see the conversation of privilege between poor whites not understanding their privilege because they're white, and then aligning with Black people and other communities of color. Thanks so much, Andrew, for bringing that into the conversation. Coleman and Mead, yeah.
Go for it, Mead.
Yeah, I think it's sort of piggybacking off what Andrew's saying. I think one thing that has to happen is it has to be seen as an us issue. Can you guys hear me?
You're kind of breaking up a little bit. You're breaking up a little bit.
It's good. Yeah, that we, this, it can't be seen of like, all right, Coleman, you want to take over?
I want to make sure I'm answering the exact question that you're asking. So ask it one more time for me.
Talking about white actor, accomplice, and allyship, like, what are some ways that white people, well, specifically white males, because like I said, I see a lot of white women in these spaces showing up.
Right.
What are some ways that white people can move along the spectrum of actor, allyship, and accomplice to really do some things for Black and brown communities?
Yeah, so as a white male, I understand that I have perhaps the greatest, the deepest well of resources, of privilege, of connections, and all of that. And that I think, there's a conversation that everybody has to have with themselves about what they're doing with their life. And at the end of their life, like looking back and going, did I use that well? And did I use those resources to advance myself and my people? Or did I use it to lift others up? And that's a conversation that's been happening forever. What's your legacy? What are you leaving behind? What do you want to talk about at the end of the day? What do you want to tell your kids about? Do you want to say, we just made ourselves better, or we really used what we had to help others with the time and the life and the resources that we had? And I think that it is that conversation. It's in conversations of deeper meaning. It's why I'm a person of faith, because I think that the deep calling that we all have is to pour out ourselves, and that means also pouring out our privilege in a way that empowers, lifts up, and betters communities around us and people around us.
Thank you. You back with us?
Yeah, I think I'm back. Yeah, I was saying that I think it has to be seen as an us issue for white people. I think probably particularly white men to be involved. And I think one thing that makes that challenging is, as I think everyone would agree, that white men are in such a position of power in this country that it can be difficult how other people are being oppressed or victimized while they're getting sort of bolstered up. And that's when you're someone that's benefiting from that system, I think there can be a lot of resistances to giving that up and aligning with a more common good or common advancement. So I guess my general sense is that one thing that has to happen is people to unify around wanting our communities to be better places for everyone, not just for certain groups of people.
So I'd like to invite Katie, Lorah, Jennifer to chime in. Now, I just want to make sure that I get to the males because, like I said, I see a lot of the white women showing up. And so, like, and, there's white male patriarchy and all those other topics, which we can have a follow-up conversation about. But I just wanted to make sure that we cover a lot of the identities that comes with, white supremacy culture and whiteness. So, Lorah, Jennifer, you have anything to add?
Yeah, I like the point that Mead was making about how white people really have to be willing to, give up power. Sometimes people are really resistant to that, but that can look like a lot of different things, but I think redistributing wealth is like a really important way that white people need to work to redistribute, power dynamics that are perpetuating white supremacy and, living in ways that are disrupting those power dynamics and redistributing power, wealth, making reparations as people. I mean,
What reparations? Did I hear the R word? Yeah. What? Someone said
I dropped it.
I didn't say it.
Reparations.
Oh, Lord.
Yes.
That's a whole nother Marnese Live talk show. All right, Katie.
Tune in next week.
Right. Okay, next week. Katie, you look like you wanted to add to that.
Yeah. So along with what Lorah's saying, we do need to structurally fix all the wrong and all the atrocities that have been committed against not just the Black community, but all marginalized groups. But I think another good way to start that is to kind of have the conversations we're having, but we need to realize it is not the Black community's job, responsibility to teach us. We have to act as true allies and educators to our white peers and be like, hi, so remember when you said XYZ? Well, the thing about that is ABC, and kind of just, I don't want to say push them where they need to be, but strongly encourage them to self-reflect, self-educate. Google is an amazing tool. Books are great, magical things, can learn so many things. Just self-education is so important, and having these tough conversations, even if it means a personal loss of sorts, if it means losing people you thought were friends, losing family. It's hard, it's difficult, but that's part of being an ally, and that's part of walking the walk. If you're gonna say, yes, I believe Black Lives Matter, yes, I'm pro-Black community, yes, I'm here to support, you can't just say that. You have to mean it, you have to do it. And I think that's something that a lot of white people who want to be allies, they're not willing to do that yet. They're a lot of people are getting there, but they're not to that point yet.
Why not? Is it like Lorah said about control and power?
Because we know, well, a lot of white people believe once we give up that power, that means everything's going to shift and it's going to be reverse roles. And I know there was a lecture, I believe, given by, her name escapes me right now, Ellis. And she asked a crowd of people, how many of you right now would want to be treated the way Black people are treated? And not a single person was like, me, I volunteer as tribute, because we know. And a lot of people don't want us to flip, so then white people are treated the way Black people are treated.
So so that's the issue. Is that one of the issues that white people may feel, that you may have heard, that Black and brown people will turn around and do exactly what white people have done to our communities?
I think that's a fear that some white people have that kind of prohibit them from being like, you know what, let go, take my power, take my privilege, like, let's make this, like, not just equal, we need an equitable divide of power. And people aren't ready for that yet, which in my personal opinion is stupid, but that's my 2 cents.
My neighbors refer to this as comeuppance, that white people are really worried about their comeuppance, that yes, when things turn around, that we will be treated and that systems will be built that are disadvantageous to us in the same way that we built systems that were disadvantageous to other people. And so we've built systems that will prop up white people long after the demographics have shifted. And the power stays, I think, with white folks for a long, long time. And I think there's a very real fear. And I think you see this in the fear of plantation owners at the time of the Civil War. I think you see this in a lot of the writings of, Southern white preachers in the time of civil rights, that we're really worried about comeuppance, and that there will be some sort of retribution that comes back to us for the things that we did to other people for so long.
Wow. Okay, so before we go to the next question, I want to shout out to the people who are watching the Marnese Lab Show. Thanks so much, Chris Scott, for tuning in. Courtney Harmon, Lily, Omani, thanks, Kama, and Alex for watching the Marnese Lab Talk Show. The chat is off the chain. So thanks so much, everybody, for tuning in, and I would definitely get to your questions. So I wanted to talk about, do white people really don't know that they're doing racist or perpetuating biases or microaggressions against Black, Indigenous people of color? Because I often have seen white people say, well, I didn't know. Like, really?
Yeah, really. Yeah, we really don't know. Until 4 years ago, I had no idea. I was just hanging around with a bunch of white folk. It was just a state of normal. It was only until I started hanging around others, so that at times I was a minority, that I started to think, hey, look at me. I'm not what I thought I was. Yeah, 56 years of not knowing, 4 years of having some knowledge equals my 60 years old age. There you go.
Yeah, I mean, I think the cultural things we learn are very deeply ingrained, and there are assumptions in there. I think there are some people that just genuinely are not aware of what they're doing. I mean, I've seen this, and I'm not in the halls of power, but I've been proximal as an activist to some of the halls of power, and just the assumptions about who should be at tables and doing things is just people don't think about how they structure those kind of things, and what do we end up perpetuating? It's a bunch of old white men in our government, pretty much all the time. And I do think some of it is intentional. I will say that. I don't think it's oh, they just don't know it all. But I do think there is, to some degree, just an unawareness even that the power is so, and they're swimming right in this sea of, they're this sort of culture of white supremacy, if you will. And so, it's hard to see when you're not up and above the sea that, it's actually a pool of water and there's something else, beyond it. So I think that there is some of that, but I don't want to discount that there are people acting in bad faith and definitely using that as an excuse to be harmful and commit microaggressions or even active aggressions that take power.
So Andrew, when a person of color, Black, brown, Indigenous, because I like to make sure I can continue to make that explicit. We don't like to be grouped together, guys, just by the way. Why is it that when a Black person, indigenous, or based on my experience, that if I call someone out in a gentle manner, because it's all about professionalism, right? About their behavior, or they may have said something that was racist, why is it an immediate tears, the white tears come down, like, oh my gosh, start crying? What is all that about? Like, Black and brown people are not getting killed on TV. Like, we haven't experienced 400 years of oppression. What is that about? Like, what?
Yeah, I mean,
and then we have to come rescue you all. Like, there is an assumption that, oh my gosh, you crying. Okay, stop crying. Why do you guys assume that we need to come to your rescue, especially when you did the bad behavior?
yeah, well, first off, thank you for calling me out on yeah, I didn't mean to lump folks together. So I think that's very important. And I've been trying to use BIPOC more as a term. I'm still getting used to it, but I appreciate that. And I will say that I honestly don't know for sure, but I suspect that it has to do with, a lot of people can't deal with guilt, especially when they've never dealt with it before or been called out. And when they are put on the spot like that, they have lived and constructed a narrative about themselves as being independent from racism or oppression. And in that moment, they have fear and anxiety because all of a sudden that construction has been shattered, and they realize, that they're doing something that they might be complicit in some of this stuff, even if it was not their intention. Not to say it may have been their intention in some cases, and they were just hoping they didn't get called out. I don't want to acknowledge that doesn't happen either, but I think that it's an immediate reaction to try and get sympathy or try to mend bridges, or some way to alleviate guilt. That would be my speculation on why folks are doing that.
Mead, did you want to say something? Because I have a follow-up question. Like, what are some suggestions that you can give white people to build their emotional stamina around stuff like this, right? Like, what can you provide them? Because a lot of white people are watching, and how can you all help them get through this? Because we're beyond that.
Yeah, I would say.
Well, I'm not going to speak for all Black people. Well, I'm beyond that.
Yeah, I think for, if white people can see those moments as opportunities to grow, that would be ideal. And that guilt is an emotion that is an important feeling to have. If you've done something to hurt somebody, it's a natural feeling to feel guilty. If you've done something sort of wrong and it's kind of the spotlight is put on it, it's a natural feeling to feel shame. These are just feelings. You can have feelings without melting down. So I think to sort of normalize that there's going to be feelings of, as I mentioned earlier in the show, that guilt and shame are going to be part of this process, and that they actually can be usable emotions to foster relationships and foster growth within yourself, actually.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to ask Jennifer, Andrew, and Lorah. You three work in the nonprofit world, right? And most of us know that the nonprofit industrial complex exists, and it exploits Black, Indigenous people of color. What are some ways to, you talked about wealth, Lorah. How can we move from exploiting Black, Indigenous people of color by moving resources from predominantly white-led organizations who are have access to funding, right? In the work we do, because a lot of the work we do is social justice, showing up for Black and brown communities. How can we undo a lot of these different behaviors that we were talking about in these different nonprofit structures that we work in, right? So Lorah, you come from work, you actually come from working from NAACP to a new organization. And then Andrew, you're at the Sierra Club, right? And then Jennifer, you work for, other nonprofits, and you have had experience working in other nonprofits that are majority white led. So how how do we move and shift these conversations? Because once again, microaggressions show up in these different organizations, and then it shows up in the communities that we're trying to do the work in. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can start. I mean, I think something that's like really important for like anyone that's working in a nonprofit is just to like really remain critical and skeptical of the institution that you're working for. And, you know, anybody who's read, like, there's a lot of books on this. The Revolution Will Not Be Funded is a good one about the nonprofit industrial complex, if you haven't heard that term and want to learn more about what that means and how it functions. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of us work for like nonprofits because we're sort of like motivated by social justice. We believe in like the mission of the organization. Like we want to believe that this institution is like changing the world and doing good things. But the reality, I mean, every nonprofit institution that I've been a part of, like pretty much every institution in the United States, like is impacted by white supremacy and has, you know, problematic power structures, and is certainly not exempt from all of these issues, even if it's doing work that is geared around social justice. And so I think, like, especially if you're a white person or a person who has, you know, a lot more privilege within the institution that you work in, it's like really important to just be aware of those dynamics and be prepared to use your privilege within that institution to disrupt the like fucked up things that are happening within that institution, even if it's an institution that's like overall doing good or like aiming to do good. And then I think also, like, if you're working for like a predominantly white institution, or just a very privileged nonprofit institution, there's obviously like a whole spectrum. It's really important to like think about how you can sort of wield the power that that institution has to, you know, redistribute power and disrupt some of those dynamics. If you're going to try to work through the nonprofit industrial complex, which is fraught.
Jennifer, did you want to chime in? Then I can go to Andrew and Coleman.
Sure. Yeah. So we actually had this experience like last week or 2 weeks ago. We heard back that we did not get funded for a proposal that we put into a major environmental organization that released requests for proposals, and the criteria was, show us how you are going to empower frontline community, grassroots communities to make a change in this coming election.
Oh, Jennifer, you broke up. Okay, well, Andrew.
And it felt schizophrenic because we didn't know how to address. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, can you go back to like the last sentence you said, because you broke up for like.
Okay.
Yeah.
So basically this funder wanted us to show how we were engaging frontline communities and at the same time engaging our legislators, and our proposal had to show strong strategy for both, but it just seemed like, which is your focus? And it almost seemed like they didn't really know. So definitely I think that that's something to address. I do know that one thing exciting that we're doing, so I'm part of a statewide nonprofit headquartered in Detroit that's part of a national network, but our mission is to inspire and equip people of faith to be better stewards of the earth. And we had a conversation about a week ago. Okay, we're aware of 30 houses of worship across the state who've done solar, and not a single one of them by a minority faith community. They're all in these middle class, wealthy, white communities. And so we had a conversation on Tuesday with one of our Detroit partners about how do we change that narrative. And at the end of the conversation, we left saying, we can do this. We don't have to beat our head against the wall about city council changing its policies or wait for the legislature to create more favorable solar policies. There are things that we see we can do just because we came together to have a conversation. And we see a clear pathway for a Detroit church to have solar panels up on the roof this year. It was so exciting to just say, by coming together to address this is an issue, we need to do something, and we can see solutions. So I think that grassroots communities, there's definitely things that we can do if we just get in communication and talk to each other.
Thank you so much. Andrew and Coleman, I wanted to bring you into this around nonprofits because, Coleman, you have a nonprofit in Pontiac, and Andrew, of course, you do environmental and climate justice work with, the Sierra Club. Did you have any thoughts on this that you could speak to?
I have thoughts, yeah. I mean, I think there's two levels here. So first off, Sierra Club is, historically and still is a largely, the staff is largely white. And, there's been a culture, right, that has been in existence for a really, really long time. We were founded in 1892. So you can imagine, some of the problematic histories that, we're tied up in. And so there's an organizational unlearning, right? And I think that organizations are in I don't know that, I can't speak for any other organizations, but I know that it's happening elsewhere as well right now. And I think that part of the problem is the cultures, not valuing smaller grassroots EJ community nonprofits. The whole system as it was kind of set up traditionally. I think there's assumptions about who should do what and how it should be done that penalize folks that are on the ground, that BIPOC-led EJ grassroots nonprofits, especially in the environmental space, I can speak to. So I think that there needs to be reform in the organization. So if you're a white person in these organizations, like Sierra Club, a lot of us have banded together. We have a union actually in Sierra Club, and we're using our union as a vehicle for pushing the organization by having our workers sign letters to leadership collectively and having conversations about this. We actually just voted to give a month of our union dues to BIPOC-led community organizations, $15,000. All of the union dues for 1 month are going to go to that, and we're trying to do a matching fundraiser. So there's stuff like that going on, but it's not enough, there needs to be more. And then I think that the other level is the funders, right, that actually set the terms that are above sort of even the organization, because they have their own assumptions that come from the way that they do business about what metrics and what sorts of people they're going to include and all of this. And that adds a whole nother level of toxicity that needs to be dismantled. And I think if the financial power is more distributed and less in the hands of this small group of individuals, I think also that would be really good for a lot of these movements, in terms of seeing more grassroots activism being supported.
Thank you.
The nonprofit world is, it's nice in that there's so much that you have to track and that you have to keep track of and take care of and do well. And so I think that there needs to be more pressure on organizations to report, what are you doing with the money that's donated to you? Great, you put out your 990, that's awesome. Your audit is incredibly boring for anybody who doesn't work in this space. I want to know, you say you're a grassroots organization, you're working in a community of color. I want to see your numbers. How many minority-owned contractors did you pay this year? How many people on your staff are people of color? How much money is going back into this community instead of, it would have been very easy for me to move into Pontiac, which is where I'm at, start my organization, but not really make it a priority to look for minority-owned contractors. I could keep hiring people, electricians, plumbers, whatever, from Auburn Hills and Rochester and Troy to come and do the work on my houses, or I can really make it a priority to hire local people who live in this community and are raising kids in this community and are, a lot of times bringing their younger apprentices, official or unofficial, with them to learn a trade. And so I think that communities, particularly communities where organizations like mine are located, which do look pretty white. I mean, my team still to this day is primarily white, and I hate that, and that's incredibly frustrating, and all the things that we're trying to work around and break down and bring more people in. But, you know, if that's the case, say, show me the money, show me the priorities that you have laid out with the funding that you've been given, the money that you have. Where is it going? How much of it's staying in this community? How much of it is going to surrounding communities? How many of your contractors are white folks who live somewhere else? How, you know, what are you doing with the resources that you're being given? And let people evaluate you and what you're doing and how you're empowering the community that you're in.
Thank you. So I wanted to shift a little bit to working within social organizations. A lot of us volunteer with Black-led organizations and are members of Black-led organizations. So were Katie and Brother Mead, Frat Mead. I wanted to specifically ask you guys, like, you both are a part of two historic Black Greek-led organizations. And what has been your experience being white and talking to family members of joining a predominantly Black organization and showing up for Black issues? Because we do work in communities, even though our founders don't discriminate, obviously. But I'm just curious to know your perspective on your experience. And have you got questions of, like, you know, showing up for Black people? And because you could have joined Sigma 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 or any other white organization. And I'm not asking why, because clearly you made a good choice, right? I'm asking, like, what has been your experience with being white within these organizations, and did your dedication to Black people ever get questioned? Because Bruce, I'm coming to you next. So get ready. And Andrew too. Because we want, the conversation is like, black and brown indigenous people, we need white people that just really start showing up for us. And so these organizations are vehicles of way to do that, right? So I just wanted to see your thoughts on that. And I'm not gonna say which organization. I mean, if you know what organization I'm a part of, then hey, you already know what organization they're a part of, so.
Me, do you want to go first, or do you want me to hop in?
Go ahead. Okay. I'll go next.
Generally speaking, my experience within Zeta has been very positive. Most people have been quite welcoming. I do tend to get questioned a bit more than my Black sisters. So why did you choose this org?
Is that coming from Black people or white people, your family?
Mostly Black people. My family, they know that I'm not one to do what's expected, which is not a reason I joined, or not a reason I crossed Zeta or chose to pursue Zeta at all. But so my family has been very supportive. A couple times they're like, why Greek life at all? But that's a separate conversation. So most of the questioning of why did you choose Zeta has come from the Black community. And it never felt like they were questioning my loyalty to the Black community or questioning my intentions. It was just kind of a very surprising, like, oh, you're white, you joined a Black org, why? Like, it didn't feel like malicious intent. There has been one instance of kind of, she doesn't belong in that org, tell her to go join, insert random Greek letters here. she doesn't belong here. She doesn't know our struggle. She will never know our struggle, which I am well aware. I will never be able to truly understand the Black experience, the BIPOC experience. I will never be able to understand that. And I am totally aware of that. I'm just here to try to use my privilege, my voice, and my experience to help lift up a community that is being attacked right now and has been attacked for decades. So that one instance kind of sticks with me, and it does hurt because no one wants to be questioned and no one wants to be told you don't belong here. But that's agree. She has every right to not trust a white person's intentions. That is totally her right, and
Right.
she is totally valid to feel that way.
Right.
So, like I said, overall, everybody's been pretty welcoming, and if they do question, I give them my spiel of why I joined and what my intentions are, and then they're like, oh, cool, and then they move on to the next thing, like, how's the weather? So it's been generally positive, which I'm super thankful for.
That's good to hear. All right, Brother Mead.
Marnese, so some of the audio was cutting out on my end. Were you were asking like how did like my family respond to me joining Sigma, and was there any other questions I missed?
Yeah, or did you get any type of negative backlash for anybody that's Black? It don't even have to be within the fraternity or, just period, like your intentions of joining these organizations, because a lot of Black people question why white people want to show up for, us. And so, this is an example, especially being a part of this historic organization.
Yeah, I think I was typically hanging around, majority Black social groups anyway. So my family, I think, probably was not too surprised. But it actually brings up an interesting thing too, I think, with white, sort of whiteness, is that there's not just like a sort of, let's say, hate of Black people. There's also, I think, an envy of Black people. And that, so because what I was going to say is that I think a lot of my family was like, oh, that's cool. Like, look at him stepping, or, there's sort of something that you were a part of that I think can be inaccessible to white people in the sense of, like a kind of like, let's say, stereotypical blandness that to be connected with Blackness actually feels sort of like, it's kind of like the kind of quote that white people love Black culture, they don't love Black people.
Right.
And so, I guess what I'm saying is that not that my family was like, oh, we don't, like your frat brothers, because they liked them, quite a bit and got close to them over the years. But I think there was also like a coolness factor actually about being accepted and a part of a Black fraternity. So, which I think again has like a downside, because if it's sort of seen as like this sort of, you're connecting with the coolness but not with like the struggle, I think that can be a problem.
Right.
And again, that's just kind of more speculative. So I guess my general answer would be that my family, they thought a lot of the stuff was pretty cool, and they liked, my frat brothers. In terms of like, I think, I had, people here and there that would question why was I joining? But I never took it, like Katie said, I didn't take it as like insult, because to me there was a very reasonable question to be asking, is like, who is this outsider coming in, and what are his intentions? And so I would try to, share my intentions to the best of my ability. But if they left still feeling like they didn't think I should be a part of the group, then I respected that. I respected that they, that was how they felt. And again, this was like less than one handful of people maybe that were really upset about it. So yeah, so I think it's mostly been, just a very welcoming. I can't even say mostly, because that would be like almost understating how accepting it's been. And I think actually the people, the couple of people that I can think of that were sort of against me joining, I think their criticism felt that of the historical injustices. But again, it was very easy to relate to and understand why they may have felt that way.
Right. So, and thanks so much. And essentially, all of us work to lift up Black people. And Bruce, when I first met you doing NAACP work, you said, I was talking to you about becoming an environmental and climate justice chairperson in Missouri. And I remember you saying, well, Marnese, I'm white.
That's
and I'm like, yeah. And then some majority of the NAACP founding members are white. So it's like, what has been your experience? It's kind of the same thing with Mead and Katie advocating for Black people, people of color in this historic civil rights organization. And you're a baby boomer, so you have been you probably seen a lot of things in your years. So at what point did you say, hey, I need to be a part or something like this organization to advance Black people and people of color?
I can speak to the clueless white people listening in, because that was me. A clueless white person. How clueless was clueless? It was the Missouri NAACP president asking me when we were talking about some issue. He said, Bruce, are you a member of the NAACP? I said, Rod, can't be, right? Because I'm white. And he wrapped me in a big hug and he said, sure you can, brother. And I joined that night. It was not very active because I couldn't figure out where the local branch was meeting for the life of me. A few months later, Rod asks if I would chair the Environmental Justice Committee for the Missouri State Conference. And I said, how well is that going to go over? Because I'm new and I'm white and I didn't even know I could be a member. But a few months after that, he puts me up there at the annual meeting for the Missouri State Conference, 350 people in the room. And there was one other white person in there. And Rod wants me to address the membership. And I've got nothing ready to say, which was a good thing, because I go up to the podium and he introduces me and says, this is our Environmental Justice Committee chair. And I'm looking at 350 people glaring at me in the audience, and I wasn't feeling very welcomed. And I was certainly feeling uncomfortable. And all I could say was, since I had nothing prepared, was, hey, I've got nothing to say. I am here to listen and learn, and probably learn over my lifetime, and do the best I can. And all the hands came down. That was a start.
Okay.
But so for me, it's been, okay, so being clueless and joining, that's not my story. My story is one of commitment, because over a period of months, and now it's been 4 years, has come acceptance. People know my intentions. That I have so many relationships that I never would have had. I have friendships that I never would have had. And it is being in relationship with people that causes me to commit. I'm not just viewing these issues academically anymore. They're not something I'm reading about. I'm not reading, and I'm not seeing a story about how somebody else has been brutalized. But now I have friends that tell me what it's like now for them today, and what it's been like for them growing up. And I'm a part of their lives, and that allows me to carry on. And I think my friends now see the intentions that I have, and it's not uncomfortable anymore. I miss being around my African American friends. So others can be as clueless as I am and suddenly find out that, all right, they've gone from actor to ally to accomplice. And it's pretty darned easy.
Wow, is it, Bruce? Okay, so before we wrap up, I wanted to, I had a question for Coleman, because he essentially is involved in the city of Pontiac and ran for city council. I hope you run again. Oh my gosh, I think I just endorsed you. Huh?
We won't tell anyone.
We won't tell anyone. Oh my gosh, this is live. Oh, oh my gosh. So, but you're not from Pontiac though.
That's true.
And so I will have to say, based on your experience coming into a Black, brown community, what would you like? What are your plans to advance our community since it's low to moderate? This is not a whole campaign speech, you know, if you decide to run again, but it's like you do have a nonprofit that's in my district, right? And you're not from here. So it's like when we see, sometimes we see that as missionary type of behavior.
Right.
And so what are you going to do to reassure that you're down for the people in Pontiac? Like I said, how are you going to continue to show up? And I have seen that, but people who are viewing this maybe can model what you have done to build relationships and be intentional and stuff like that. So I just like to hear your thoughts before we wrap up.
Sure. So I'm not from Pontiac. I grew up in Central Arkansas, and after college said I wanted to move somewhere and live as a neighbor and just make, you know, a community better by being a good neighbor. I believed in that mission. I believed that was possible, that just moving in and doing life as a neighbor and as a person in the community, you know, could improve a neighborhood. And so we settled on our house. 32 Newberry was where we moved in, and we didn't know what we were doing. Like, we literally just hung out for a year and just asked a lot of questions. And I think, you know, to your missionary comparison, I think white people and white saviors especially come in and go, what are the problems? And I am here to fix them because I'm amazing. And that just wasn't, I don't have that kind of energy. And so it was just a lot of sitting on porches and asking questions, you know, what, not just the, you know, what sucks about this neighborhood and what can we, but like, what's going well? Where do your kids go to school? What do they do? What's fun to do around here? What's, you know, do you know your city council person? Do you know the police? Like, where's everybody hanging out for fun? Who's the 70-year-old lady on the block who knows everybody and everybody's business? And we just spent the better part of a year hanging out and getting to know people and doing the weird work of fixing bikes and that sort of thing. Ultimately, we settled on food. We grow a lot of food. Our neighbors are still our lead volunteers. We are really rigid about making sure that people from outside of our community aren't putting in more hours than people inside of our community. That is a community garden run by the people in our neighborhood. And that when I ran for city council, it was as an extension of the work that we were already doing. It was not the reason I moved to my neighborhood. But as I hung out and started getting to know people and talking, we didn't know our representatives. We didn't know who our city council person was. We never saw him. And even, you know, there's the insult that they only show up on election years. And then there's the double insult of never showing up. And so we had a lot of folks who felt like our person never showed up. And so I ran because of that. And I ran and I lost. I lost by 40 votes. And you know what changed about the work that I do every day? Not a thing. Just keep doing what we're doing, keep hanging out, keep growing food, keep making sure kids have school supplies, keep making sure that our kids are getting toys for Christmas, hang out with the people in our community, and that was it. And that didn't stop when I lost, and it wouldn't have stopped if I won, and we keep going.
Thank you. So before I know we stayed on a little bit longer, and we still have a lot of people tuning in, but I wanted to make sure that we move into action, right? Because this is a time where we need to be showing up and doing the work to dismantle white supremacy, right? And we can't do that all in an hour and a half show. So there will be a follow-up conversation in depth, and I would love to have you all on again. But what can you offer white people that are tuning in to not be complicit in white supremacy culture, and to also, what does accountability look like? You guys had some great thoughts on building relationship, but like tangible ideas would be very good right now.
I'm all about starting with you, within your home, within your family, within your small circle, and just try to tackle the issues that lie in there. And then once you've at least started that conversation, even if it doesn't go the way you want it to go, then from there start branching out. Because, like, cliche as it sounds, a pebble in the water can set the sea in motion. Like, the tiniest little motion in a pond can make this huge ripple effect. So if you have this conversation with, say, your mom, and then your mom's like, you know, some of those points were really good, and then she's talking to her friends at, I don't know, crochet club or something, and then she mentions some of those ideas, and then they take away some of that and they spread it to their family, to their friends, and so on and so forth. While not all of the ideas can be like shoved into somebody's brain and they're like, yes, I'm so willing to learn, I want to absorb all this like a sponge, give me all the ideas, like I want to change my ways right now. Well, you're not going to get that same energy from everybody you talk to. It's a start, and it's going to be difficult, it's going to be emotional, it's going to be exhausting, but it is so incredibly necessary. Check yourself, check your family, check your friends, and shoot, check your coworkers, because Ms. Barbara, a couple cubicles away, sometimes she's not that accepting either. So just check your peers and then gradually work into the systematic issues. Well, work on both at the same time, but you know, I'm really big into starting small, because the smallest can sometimes have the most impact.
Thank you, Soar. All right, who would like to go next? Jennifer, you look like you're ready.
Talk so much.
Yes, I'm ready. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So the things that I can do, that I am doing, is I support Black-led innovations and initiatives. So in my free time, I volunteer for a number of Detroit-based organizations that seek to empower young and emerging leaders. So one of them is called Association for Youth Empowerment, and we just launched an Emerging Leaders Initiative where we get behind and support a young and emerging leader who is already out in the community, but to provide them with a platform for the fundraising for their initiative. So one young man, he's 25 years old, on the east side of Detroit. He lost his grandma's house and bought it back from the land bank, and he's turning it into a multimedia center for youth to express themselves creatively. I'm jazzed about the opportunity to just be a conduit for resources going into young and emerging leaders. Another nonprofit that I volunteer with is Talbia, started by an urban planner who, her approach, being from the community, is rather than taking the urban planning approach, to actually equip community with tools to develop their own cultural plan that celebrates the unique assets and heritage of that community, and equips them with the tools to re-envision and bring language to their new vision for their communities. So to the extent to which I can be a conduit for resources going into the Black community, into young and emerging leaders, that is what I'm jazzed about, I'm excited about, and where there's joy. So I will continue to the extent possible to, there's no shortage of ingenuity, genius, and innovation in the Black community. So it really doesn't take looking very far. So wherever the opportunity presents itself, whatever I can do to be available for that, that's what I'm doing.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Okay, Lorah.
I'm really into moving money, and I think like a lot of people have alluded to the like historical systems that have been in place, such as redlining. A couple of people mentioned that have created like pretty dramatic racial wealth gap, and I think that like redistributing our resources as white people is like a really critical aspect of being anti-racist and a really critical practice in like living an anti-racist life. And that's like gonna look different for everybody, but I think moving money is like something that everybody should be doing.
Thank you so much, Lorah. Okay, Andrew, what can you offer our viewers?
Well, I think that we, and I'm saying we as white people, because I see this a lot, need to realize that the moment is now, right? Like, and we have to realize that there are very few things that are somebody else's problem, politically. What we ultimately have in this country is a political challenge tied up in a very racist history. We have 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prisoners, right? We have median white household wealth, about $140,000. Black wealth, just 11,000. Latinos, about 13,000. These are deep issues caused by zoning, caused by energy systems, caused by police brutality. And I see politically in a lot of communities, we're going to focus inward. We're very progressive, but we're very concerned with just these few niche local issues that affect me. And that thinking has to stop. We need to dismantle this in every community. And we need to be fighting on all fronts. Like the idea that people can sit back and not do anything or not demand more from their politicians, to me, is very disturbing. So I think people need to hold their politicians accountable, not just voting, but speaking on these issues, like being out in the front and vocal. And I think that we ultimately need to measure our progress in terms of, practicing a lot of this allyship and, beyond, in terms of what we can actually deliver in closing some of those gaps and, creating a more just and fair society.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Okay, Brother Mead.
I think one thing is, I think white people need to live outside of their bubble and interact and mingle really outside of their bubble. One of the common denominators I hear so often in talking to white people about what maybe sort of help them progress a little bit in terms of seeing race in a more maybe evolved way is that they started to have some sort of relationships with Black people, so they could see, man, I really thought it was just a joke until I saw my buddy keep getting pulled over, or I thought like Katie was alluding to, I really thought that Black people were so dangerous until I was in the inner city and realized that people act just like people do anywhere. So I think those types of experiences are essential, because you can't really dismantle the way you think about the world unless you go out and experience the world. So I think that's an important thing. The other one I think I've mentioned already, but is just to reiterate, is I think an internal reflectiveness about yourself, because I think it can be very easy to say, like, I'm the good white person who's sort of woke, and like the problem is outside of me, and I think that can cause a bit of a dichotomy. So I think to become familiar with your own sort of badness or kind of bad parts that you're working on, I think is a really healthy thing to be doing on an ongoing basis. And then the other thing that I always try to do is support Black businesses, and I think it gets to something about at least one slice of what Lorah was mentioning is, things are so unequal, and it's going to stay that way. But we have a lot of power in how we, where we spend our dollars at, and so if you can, support Black businesses in any aspect of your life, you're I think at least contributing to balancing out economics, but also dismantling the idea that Black people are not capable. It's also, when you support someone in terms of where you spend your dollars, it says something about how you see the person. So I think that's another important step.
Thank you. And thanks so much for lifting up supporting Black businesses. Okay, Brother Coleman.
White people gotta start educating themselves in other ways. We can't get incrementally more aware just by killing Black people. It is insane that is the leverage point that so many folks that I know have had in their life to become more aware is, the Philando Castile video, or, Botham Jean was a friend of mine. He and I went to the same university together. And that was an awakening moment for a lot of folks that sort of went to our same university. But man, killing Black people can't be the way that we slowly become more exposed to the problems. We got to read books. We got to spend time with people of color. We got to get into communities that don't look like ours. That doesn't necessarily mean living there like I decided to do, but just spending time in communities that look different than yours opens your mind and opens your worldview to the experience of other people. And we've got to be doing more than that. And I know that white people like to be real busy and probably too busy to have their minds open that way. But finding time to become a better person is definitely a thing worth doing. I also support, Black-owned businesses and Black-run organizations. I talk all the time that it's not fair that so many of my friends who are running and struggling to run small organizations, who are actually closer to the problem, who are more aware about the things that actually make a difference in their community, but because they grew up in communities like ours, have a harder time getting access to resources. And so creating opportunities and spaces where more people can find out about those organizations, more people can see their work, and organizations can come along and support them and the things that they do on the ground in the community is incredibly important.
Okay. All right, Brother Bruce, bring us home.
Take time to be in the minority. Step out of your own spaces and go into other spaces, whether it's spending $30, joining the NAACP, attending the monthly branch meetings and being the one white person in the room, or if you go to church on Sundays, take a year away from yours and go spend time at somebody else's. Be in the minority, listen when you're there, relish the friendships that will follow, and certainly the lifetime of learning which will follow still.
Thank you so much. So I want to say thanks so much for being a part of the Marnese Live Talk Show once again. Like I said, we'll definitely have a more in-depth conversation about each one of these topics. This is always good to get the conversation going. So let's not stop here. And I would like to say thank you to my brother and my brothers Andrew and Bruce and the struggle, the NAACP struggle, and Coleman, Yaktown, don't back down. Lorah, my homegirl, thanks so much for coming on. Jennifer, you always my homie in the environmental justice space. I learned a lot from you. To my blue and white family. So I didn't want to say our name because sometimes our sorority and fraternity is not a monolith. Like everybody had different viewpoints. But since you guys said it, since you brought it up, I am so thankful for having first and foremost, my SOAR, Sigma Kappa. Thank you. I love Sigma Kappa, Central Michigan. Katie on the show, and my brother, my sans, Mead from Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated on the show. And thanks so much for tuning in and being part of the conversation. Like I said, the conversation don't stop here because we have a lot of work to do to dismantle white supremacy. Once again, I like to say thank you, and we're going to I would like to definitely get a shout out to the chat for people who stayed on, and make sure that we continue to have these conversations. They gave you action steps, excuse me, and so look forward to the next steps. So coming up on the Marnese Live Talk Show on next week, we're going to continue the conversation on anti-Blackness and how it shows up in different forms. And so we're going to talk about Black and being LGBTQIA next week on the Marnese Live Talk Show, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Facebook Live. So I look forward to you all tuning into that show. We have a full panel once again. And I would like to thank you all for tuning in and staying on. And shout out to everyone in the chat, especially I have to definitely give shout outs to my mom and my sister for tuning in. And I have some viewers who like to have all the information for your nonprofits, Micah 6, of course, the Sierra Club, the organization Jennifer is a part of, and of course, Lorah. So inbox me all the information so I can pass it along to the viewers. So thanks so much for tuning into the Marnese Live Talk Show, and have a wonderful night.
Thanks, Marnese.
Thanks so much for doing this.